A man with low mentality.
This was a man who, after every harassment, imprisonment, beating, sustaining wounds, he came out stronger.
To steal money like
Fela is the best man in this world.
Let me put it this way. If I had to choose a father to come back to this life, I would choose my father again.
He was true with his performances, and he was real.
Fela Kuti was a man who loved making a statement. As he grew popular, his profile as a star became more defined. He attracted attention with his entourage everywhere he went.
Fela had 14 vehicles, 14. I designed all the logos, emblazoned on all the vehicles. So when we go, it's an entourage. Imagine 14 cars with Fela and Africa 70, Fela and his face on all the cars. It was real life, real superstar life.
When Fela formed Afrobeat, he looked into his roots for inspiration. His lavish grand stage performances were borrowed from the African traditional ways of celebration, stitched up well with his music education.
Now, you must look at somebody who's now read about traditions and cultures of our people, who has researched. By working in the Nigerian Broadcasting Corporation means he had access to tapes to show the things our people have always been doing, the grandioseness of our cultural expressions. They're there in Egbaland when people do ceremonies, when they do festivals, the Agemo festival, the Egungun festivals. It's with verve, it's with life, it's total theater. And here's an educated one musically who wants to cross the experience of what he knows traditionally and bring the essence of that and merge it into what could happen on stage, live, real time.
While performing in his own nightclub, The Shrine, Fela was often seen wearing white powder on his face. Many close to him believe Fela was assuming the role of a chief priest, as the shrine was also his spiritual place. On the first anniversary of the Kalakuta attack in 1978, Fela married 27 women. The reason behind this is still unclear, but it was largely seen as a way of answering critics who accused him of abducting women.
It's very important for a man to marry many women, because a man goes for many women in the first place. A man is not supposed to run around the streets after women. See, women should be in his home.
As Nigerians celebrated their 19th year of independence in 1979, General Obasanjo decided to end the country's 13 years of military rule by handing over power to Shehu Shagari. On Obasanjo's last day in office, Fela Kuti had a surprise farewell present for the man who had led the raid on his compound 2 years earlier. Fela and his wives carried a mock coffin, symbolizing that of Fela's mother, to the gates of the Dodan barracks where Obasanjo lived. They were confronted by the military, but defied orders and left the casket at the gate.
Before anything at all, and go they shout,
Around the same time, he released a song called Coffin for the Head of State, a record said to be the most painful he'd ever written.
Them kill many students. Them burn many houses. Them burn my house too. Them kill my mama. So I carry the coffin.
Every time I listen to that song deeply, I could probably cry. Because, and if you listen very closely, you probably hear he was crying when he was singing the song.
So Fela's first decade as an Afrobeat musician ended in tragedy. Losing his mother tormented him for the rest of his life. However, rather than abandoning his cause, Fela used these experiences as an inspiration to write more lyrics.
Who go one take coffin? Them must take 'em. Now the bad things. We dead on.
This was a man who, after every harassment, imprisonment, beating, sustaining wounds, he came out stronger. He wrote a song about Kalakuta. He called it Kalakuta Show, when they came to burn the house. So anytime they arrested him, beat him up and things like that, he came out stronger than before. And he always had a song, a new song for that incident.
Kalakuta Show. Kalakuta Show. Them actually use them jaggers some button and bullet.
Fela began touring again, his rebel tag often causing a stir wherever he went. On one occasion, he was performing his hit record Zombie in Ghana. Protests broke out and Fela was banned from entering the country again.
Fall down, get ready, attention, quick march, slow march, left on, right on.
He continued to carry the torch for his political beliefs, even when touring outside Africa.
Get ready, hot.
I'll tell you another story. We went to perform in Germany at the Jazz Festival in Berlin. That was in 1979. And we had on the entourage his personal lawyer, who was a Ghanaian, George Gardner. And Fela planned for his women to carry some placards with some ideological things written on the placards. So when we got to Berlin, his manager, J.K. Breimer, his friend manager, told him not to do that. His lawyer, George Gardner, advised him not to do that. But I tell you, eventually, by the time we got to the venue, Fela had distributed the placards to his women, and they carried the placards.
The influence he had on ordinary people inspired him to start thinking of changing Nigeria himself. Together with groups of young supporters in 1979, Fela formed the Movement of the People and put himself forward to run for president. But his candidature was turned down by authorities.
They're trying to make the government into a two-party government where they won't be able to register any more parties. They want to make it like a law that the government cannot have more than two parties in the country.
Because he believed that it's only through the ideas of the enlightened minds that the society will gain its freedom. And he was enlightened enough and powerful enough within the system at that time to want to run for president. So the only thing the system could do was to prevent him and his party. If they had made the mistake of registering and accepting for him to run, Nigeria wouldn't be the way Nigeria is today. Africa will not be the way Africa is today. Never.
However, the blocking of his presidential ambitions did not stop his activism in other areas. He called on not only Nigerians, but all Africans to be more vigilant against corruption and authoritarian rule.
Attitudes and expressions from people were beginning to change. Before, our people could hardly ever express themselves or talk about things. But I see the Fela in them now. That means Fela is working.
But after his presidential hopes were frustrated in 1979, Fela once again returned to his first love, music.
Everywhere you go, everywhere you date, everybody wants.
As the year drew to a close, he created a new band, the Egypt 80, in 1979. He was inspired by ancient Egypt's civilization and urged Africans to embrace its philosophy, science, and even religion.
So he was, as a Pan-Africanist revolutionary, he used his might to protect all of us.
Friend to commissioner, friend to permanent secretary, friend to minister, friend.
With his new band, Fela released a 25-minute political screed entitled ITT, International Thief. In it, he named top corporate officers and politicians involved in corruption.
To steal money like Obasanjo and Abiola. International TT. ITT. International TT. International Rook. International TT. International Thief. International TT.
In September 1984, as Fela was about to leave for the US, he was arrested at the airport and taken to face a military tribunal. He was charged with smuggling currencies out of the country.
Guilty. Not be outside and jail me 5 years. I no do nothing. Not be outside and judge they beg you. Now Chris will be that.
He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, the longest term he ever received.
Whites are mistreating blacks in South Africa. Okay, that is bad. That is racism. They have a reason to do it. Then blacks are mistreating blacks in Nigeria. What's the reason? That's worse. Police beat people on the streets like dogs. They don't, in South Africa, they do it, but they know they face public criticisms. So they watch themselves to do it. But in Nigeria, they say Nigeria is against apartheid. Nigeria is this, Nigeria is a good... In America, talks about Nigeria, like Nigeria is the greatest African country. But Nigeria is the worst African country, where the worst things are happening, worse than South Africa.
Fela's imprisonment attracted international attention and condemnation. The human rights group Amnesty International said the prosecution was political. Artists called for his release. After 20 months, Fela was released, and one of his first acts was to divorce all his wives, saying that he no longer believed in the institution of marriage because it led only to jealousy.
She go say him equal to man. She go say him get power like man. She go say anything man do himself he do. I never tell you finish. I never tell you finish. I never tell you finish. I never tell you finish.
This used to be our swimming pool. This is where our swimming pool was. We had our swimming pool here. We have our building here. Then we have Bearcross Clinic. We had Bearcross Clinic here. This was where Bearcross Clinic was.
Fela used to be a man who accommodates a lot. He accommodates people. He makes people happy. He gives people everything you want in your life. Fela used to be a very good person. of which everybody knows. It's just because of his truth, the truth that he was saying, that's why some people don't like him.
The same old politicians who spoiled Nigeria before.
The following years, Fela would lead a quiet life. His album output would slow down, and the legend of Afrobeat would focus more on his spirituality at the shrine.
Get 2 ears for head, them get 2 eyes to them. They see the thing where they happen, them they.
The shrine was the nightclub and the place where Fela worshipped.
By him coming up with something like a shrine, whereby people would go and listen to music like the whole day, and you'll have performances the whole day. I think that must have been something someone who has a very high level of IQ. You can't do that with a normal IQ level.
In August 1997, Fela Kuti died. The rumor mill was rife with reports that the 58-year-old succumbed to HIV and AIDS-related complications. Those closest to the Afrobeat star, however, say he died from the torture he sustained from the military.
Do you know how many times they broke his bones, his ribs? Yeah, during Shagari era, they sent them policemen and the rest to come and beat him up. And they broke his ribs.
Fela is the best man in this world. He's the best husband a woman can have in this world.
Let me put it this way. If I had to choose a father to come back to this life, I would choose my father again.
And the rest they hungry. Me Fela, I challenge your boss.
But his music lived on.
Go when he got I go open book for them. Now why your government we do? Heck by me, oh.
"20 years after his death, Fela Kuti's life and music still arouse strong emotions among those who knew him and his fans. Among those he inspired were two of his own sons. The first was Femi.
My first improvisation in the band was in University of Ife. About 5,000 students in front of us. And my father had called me out. I was playing saxophone, called me out to take a solo. And he already told me that I probably would take a solo. And I'd been practicing. Then we got to the venue. All the students shouting, "Fela, Fela." And I was thinking all night, he's going to call me out. Then he called me. "My son, Femi, come and take a solo." I just started shaking. I was shaking, shivering. Then he put me in front of the mic, and I couldn't blow. I said, "Blow!" Nothing could come out. Then I finally he hit my back, and I finally found courage. I must have played rubbish, because I can't remember what happened. But they must say, "Oh, very nice, very nice, very nice."
The other son who followed in his father's footsteps is SEUN.
My dad used to travel with like 70 people, So all the tours in the 80s until his last tour in 92, I used to always be on the road, And I think that was one of the things that inspired me to play music, just watching my father every night on stage and, having a good time and being paid for doing something, you know. In fact, it was after a show at the Apollo Theater, I believe, that I told my dad I wanted to play music. Somewhere in New York, I think.
Many other artists have been influenced by Fela, including DEDE MABIAKU, who used to be the opening act at all of Fela's local and international shows.
For Fela's lyrics, they are histrionics. Fela's lyrics are very prophetic. Fela's lyrics are very down-to-earth, realistic, and true. Fela's lyrics are such that they create the essence of what emancipation represents for Africa and for the world.
Before you know, commotion don't start. Big trouble, big argument. Big fights, big everything. Commotion they go, commotion they come. Fight they start, fight they stop. Trouble they turn.
In the lyrics like Sorrow, Tears and Blood, he said, my people, they fear too much for the thing they no see. I no one die. My mama dey for house, I won't build house, I get one child.
Always get reason to fear. We no one die, we no one wound, we no one quench, we no one go. I get one child, mama dey for house, my papa dey for house. I won't build house, I don't build house. I no one quench, I won't enjoy, I no one go.
I see Africans today, what we do is just we suffer, we smile, you know. Every African man smiles. How are you? You see, we smile because we are good people, probably. But you see, people don't have to smile in a bad condition. That is making the matters worse. That is going into slavery. You see, because our condition is not a condition of smiling.
Money get the power, it come steal money. Why? I don't know. You don't know anything at all. You this my brother. Try this one. Him not no hungry people. Him not no jobless people. Him not no homeless people.
You know, Afrobeat music was born out of a socialist ideology. Afrobeat music is socialism in a musical form. To the way my dad ran his home, the message in the music, and what it takes to create the music.
Current African musicians have their own take on Fela and what he meant to the Nigerian music scene and Africa as a whole.
Fela's influence on African music can still be heard today. If you listen to everything coming out of Nigeria right now, we call Niger beat. That thing where there's that kind of percussion thing, that has its roots in Afrobeat, in what Fela was doing. Of course, Fela had himself innovated what traditional Nigerian music was doing, but you can also hear that in music like Chakacha from Kenya, or Isukuti, also from Kenya. Even songs like Toyanze, 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 that sort of extra percussion vibe. And so, in every way, Fela's music continues to live through what musicians in Africa are doing right now.
Then when you talk of Fela's performances, he was just enigmatic on stage. He was charismatic on stage. He was very true to the art. No faking. He gave his all every time he mounted the stage. And you know that whenever he left the stage, he has left his spirit with everybody right there. He was true with his performances. And he was real.
The issues discussed in today's music tend to be lighter weights than Fela's were in his day.
I think Beautiful Nubia is a very close one. Beautiful Nubia, though he talks about moral but I think he's still moving close. He's still inspirational. Most artists are always singing about love and all that, but I think I enjoy Beautiful Nubia before his.
When we compare the kind of messages Fela was passing on and the message now that we're borrowing from his music, but not talking about social injustices, we're talking about money and sex and love. It's kind of inevitable that we have artists right now who will talk about those things because it's our reality.
Current stars may be just courting fans or simply avoiding trouble, playing it safe.
If I tell you, hey, I love you, my money, my body, now your own.
So what would Fela think about African music today?
Fela was very socially conscious when it came to his lyrics. He used to address a lot of issues that were going on in the African society. Nowadays, it's less of that and more of the party scene and more of love songs. You know, more of feel-good music right now. So I think that's the main difference between then and now.
And what would he think about the state of African politics today?
If Fela came back today and saw the choices that Nigeria had made, I think that he would be very disappointed, you know. But I think that goes the same for anyone who was fighting any fight for justice in the time that when Africa became independent.
I don't believe he will still be alive. He'll have died of high blood pressure. The fact that Obasanjo came back to rule in 1999 and people trooped out in their millions to vote for him, I don't think he could have taken that. After all the songs against him, Obasanjo, no way. So when people say they wish he was alive, and I don't see that happening.
Which kind of election be this?
Fela Kuti may no longer be around, but his music most certainly is. And his legacy of making Africans more vocal about social issues lives on.
Them come get big numbers. Thousands to thousands. Millions to millions. Which kind of election be this? Babala nonsense. Babala nonsense. Now they mock see the dirty. Now they mock see the dirty. Kuti shall see the mock see. Bumbuch, na oniboti she has. Na onibo for Europe. Oniboti shows many things. Many of them things.